Served as ambassador to Canada, West Germany, US, and Iran. He was foreign secretary and later as special envoy to various countries. Mr. Najmuddin Shaikh. We'll now invite the academic, Professor Pervez Hoodbhoy, who's a nuclear physicist with Foreman Christian College and previously with Quaid-e-Azam University. Hoodbhoy is also a prominent activist, in particular concerned with promotion of freedom of speech, secularism, and education in Pakistan. We will start with a mini documentary, and I believe we don't have any volunteers, so I will offer my services to start the laptop. Just a minute. It's a 2.5-minute documentary, and I'll encourage you to watch it. Ji, 1 minute. ये सलीम साहब, सलीम साहब, volume is not working. आप लोग प्लीज अगर इधर आके बैठ जाएं सब कुछ, just for the documentary. नहीं यहाँ तो है, आप लोग इधर आ जाएं. I think आपको वहाँ से नजर नहीं आएगी.
सैर कराएं तुमको पाकिस्तान की, इसकी खातिर हमने दी कुर्बानी लाखों जान की. पाकिस्तान जिंदाबाद, पाकिस्तान जिंदाबाद. आओ बच्चों सैर कराएं तुमको पाकिस्तान की, इसकी खातिर हमने दी कुर्बानी लाखों जान की. पाकिस्तान जिंदाबाद, पाकिस्तान जिंदाबाद.
Professor Hoodbhoy. Thank you. Well, we just saw the documentary. That was a kind of to get us all focused. Now, Pakistan has a political history which is not more than 86 years old, starting from 1933. That's when the term Pakistan was coined. Subsequently, in 1940, the Pakistan Resolution, and 47, when we got the independence. And that makes it to around 86 years. Now, this is the political history. We have another history which is better known as the genealogical Islamic history of Pakistan. And this dates from 712 AD or 93 Hijrah. And this history starts when Muhammad bin Qasim came to this land and conquered it. You can call it the Immaculate Conception. That's when it started. Some even take it further to 1441 years. That's exactly when Islam originated in the modern-day Saudi Arabia. Now it's the chasm between the parallel histories that we run the Pakistan political and the Islamic genealogical Pakistan, that has led to a lot of confusion and in terms of establishing an identity and the resultant distortion of what we call as the national identity, thus the never-ending battle for a Pakistan narrative. For 72 years, we have been security-centric, oblivious to the threats like economic, biological, as we are just seeing, environmental, and most importantly, not many of us realize it's a very hyper-connected world in an over-digitalized society where we have threats. You won't see the common enemy in shape of a state. Maybe it will be a young teenager. At the push of a click of a button, he can totally dismantle the electric grid of a city or a state. So these are the new kind of threats that we'll be facing. And that actually changes the paradigm and in terms of a better outlook that needs to be appreciated and worked on. So I'll start today's session. My first question to Professor Robinson, and the same question will go to Mr. Najmuddin Shaikh as well. I'll start with Professor Robinson. Would you care to shed light on the chasm as just described and the two parallel streams from which our national and from which our narrative originates, and whether the twains shall ever meet harmoniously? Professor Robinson.
Could you just repeat that? I didn't hear very clearly.
Would you care to shed light on the chasm as just described and the two parallel streams from which our narrative originates, and whether the twains shall ever meet harmoniously?
I still haven't got your question very clearly, unfortunately. The chasm between what and what?
I beg your pardon?
The chasm
Between
between what and what?
the genealogical Pakistan, the Islamic genealogical, and the political Pakistan.
Okay. Well, of course, in part, the genealogical Pakistan, which you had as beginning with Muhammad bin Qasim and so on, that is very much a present issue rather than a past issue, because this is something which historians are constantly interpreting and reinterpreting and competing with each other about. So, in a sense, the chasm that you see is one that's very much in the present. As far as the political one is concerned, one thing you've left out in your presentation is the whole process of the development of Muslim separatism from the 19th century onwards in British India. And that, in a sense, is the point at which the political drives and formations are coming together, which are going to make Pakistan. So I think if one's going to start your work, one would want, first of all, to look at how Muslim separatism developed in the 19th century, a process in which some Muslims, not all Muslims, played a major role, in which Hindu revivalism played a major role, and so too did the policies of the British. So one needs to have that firmly in mind, and also to recognize that this drive, for which eventually leads to a Pakistan, is also resisted by quite a lot of Muslims. It was contested by lots of Muslims. And I think it's important to realize that. Not a complete answer to your question, but it might take things forward.
So you said it was contested by a lot of Muslims. Would you like to elaborate?
Right. Well, first of all, as Sir Syed Ahmed Khan was developing his Aligarh College and his movement, this movement was very strongly rejected by Muslims, often from the Kasbahs of Awadh. In fact, one of the key vehicles of this process of rejection was the satirical newspaper Awadh Punch, and which was edited by a man called Muhammad Sajjad. So there was a clear group of people who were pro-Congress, not against Congress, who rejected the way in which Sir Syed was going. And I think it's very important for people now to be aware of that. The only people currently around who do keep that memory alive are the Indian Muslims, who actually need to remind people in the world in which they move that, in fact, they weren't all supporters of Pakistan, that there were significant members of this community who had supported the Indian National Congress. People like Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, Hakim Ajmal Khan, Dr. Ansari, obviously Abul Kalam Azad, people like that.
Thank you. Ambassador, how would you agree or differ?
Oh, thank you very much. I'd really like to go back to the basics. What is the Pakistan narrative? What is the audience for the Pakistan narrative? Acha, abhi sunai de raha hai? Acha. Sorry, no, this is more comfortable, I think. I think the narrative we wish to project is that Pakistan, while being an Islamic Republic of Pakistan, is returning to the Pakistan that the founder of Pakistan had visualized. It was a country that was to be the homeland for the Muslims of South Asia. It was to be a country in which the Muslims would be able to develop their full economic potential, would be able to maintain their own way of life without the overlap of a dominant majority intent on imposing their own political and economic hegemony. This was not an idle fear. I go back to 1905 and the first meeting of the Muslim League in Dhaka, in which the fear was expressed that the British would leave, and their leaving was inevitable. But then you would have the Muslims being only 25% of the population and fearing that the Indian or the Hindu majority would impose their own will on them, and that how would they be able to maintain their own way of life. And I think that the Quaid turned from being the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity to becoming the founder of Pakistan only because he realized that this was the only way in which the Muslims could be able to realize, to get a homeland in which they could realize their full economic potential. I want to emphasize that I think the Quaid was very clear that we are not talking about a religious state. We are talking about a state in which people will be living their lives, going to their temples, going to their mosques, going elsewhere. Religion was not the business of the state, and that all of them would otherwise have all the rights of a citizen, and there would be nothing to compel them to follow one or the other. Implicit, of course, in all this was that this would be a country with an overwhelming Muslim majority. And if it was an overwhelming Muslim majority, the Muslim majority's way of life would prevail. If in the Judeo-Christian civilization of which, in which Europe takes pride, requires that Christmas be a holiday, or that New Year's be observed, or other holidays of this nature be observed, this is not imposing a religion, but this is the way of life. And I think I can't vouch for the provenance of this story, but the story is that when the Deobandis went to the frontier and thought that this is the area in which you would be able to develop an insurrection against the British rule, one of the Deobandis watched the Pathans bathing bare-chested, young Pathans bathing bare-chested, and he said to them that this is against the principles of Islam, whereupon they turned around and said, Rawaj, Rasam, is what determines our way of life in ordinary course, unless it is explicitly against the spirit of Islam or the dictates of Islam, and we don't believe that this is against the dictates of Islam. Now, this is exactly, I think, what the Quaid wanted, and I wanted to say that we've made some progress in that direction, but we've also had bad moments. For instance, the Pakistan University banned the use of lipstick, that girls were not allowed to use lipstick. It was reversed, but it took a great deal of fervor on the part of people like they are in this audience, to get a reversal of this. Another order was passed in KPK that all girls must wear hijab. Again, the order was reversed, but it was passed first. In Haripur, the same thing happened. Now, these are the negatives that one has to contend with and to get over. I was very happy that when there was a reference to the Council of Islamic Ideology with regard to the fact that this film, well, everybody knows the film Zindagi Tamasha, that they wanted the government, in response to a threat of a strike by Labak, said that we want the Council of Islamic Ideology to rule on this. And I think we were very fortunate that Katib Ayaz Sahab, Qibla Ayaz Sahab, as the chairman of the Council of Islamic Ideology, said, I will give you an opinion. The decision will lie with the film censor boards of the provinces. And I will give you an opinion only by taking on board and consulting those who are in the business of producing films. Now, this was a very good decision, because otherwise it seemed to me that the next step would be for us, for the government to refer again to to Qibla Ayaz, the fact that should we have candidates vetted? Should they be termed as honest and worthy? In which case we would have created the Council of Guardians that in Iran has just disqualified virtually every reformist candidate, and therefore the battle for the election to be held later this month, next month, February 21st I think is the date, would be only the conservatives and the ultra-conservatives. Now, this is not a situation that you want here, and this is not a situation that I think the Qaid would have been horrified to think that this was even contemplated. So I think what we have to focus on is that we have done things that have moved us forward. I am particularly impressed by the fact that we now have British Airways flight operating, that the British have issued an advisory saying that travel in Pakistan is advisable or is possible, and please take advantage of that. British Airways and the UK High Commissioner talks proudly of the fact that there are 22 flights from 4 airports between the UK and Pakistan, and that he talks of the fact that we have now looking forward to a great deal of tourism coming from the UK. But the UK is not alone. There are other travel sites and centers which have all advocated travel to Pakistan. This is a good thing. This is the way in which you are moving towards what the Qaid envisaged as Pakistan. It was not meant to be, it was not, the emphasis was on realizing the economic potential, not that this was a state made in the name of Islam. In fact, those who advocated Islam were those who were opposed to the creation of Pakistan and only jumped on the bandwagon later. I think these are things that we should recognize, and the narrative that you're building is a narrative that has to struggle against the forces that are seeking to lead you in this direction. And I'm hoping that for a number of reasons, the most conspicuous of which is the FATF and the fact that you are on the grey list, that there are certain items that you have not yet contended with. And in my view, it is probable that you will continue to stay on the grey list, but not on the black list. And that is one driving force. But this driving force has to come from us, not because of FATF, but because our own return to our original raison d'etre is that we should move in that particular direction. and that we should eliminate. Today, let us be honest, when we talk about the unending struggle for Pakistan narrative, that you continue to be regarded as a homeland for terrorist organizations. You talk about the fact that 20 of the 72 terrorist organizations that are recognized by the UN are in the AFPAC region, and of them 7 are in Pakistan alone. Now, this is something that we have to get over. We proscribed these organizations. We must move further and make sure that these organizations are no longer able to function from here. I'll stop here. I'm sorry, I don't want to take up too much time. But my last sentence, please let's focus on going back to what the Quaid intended. A homeland for the Muslims of South Asia. I'm not going to go into the Bangladesh issue and other issues that have bedeviled us and have torn us asunder in many ways, but that we have to, for this purpose, be able to focus on 2 things. One, that those elements that are associated with terrorism, whether right or wrong is not the issue. That is how you're perceived, and that perception has to be addressed. And 2, we must have the patience to say that we will have to work to develop political cohesion within the country and to develop our economic potential. That is going to take time, and it is going to take much better governance than we have today. So you have to build your management skills to a point where when you talk to an inspector general, he is not free to go around making his views public, because that is not what a civil servant does. And their civil servant must return to being an independent body which implements the policies after giving their advice that the government of the day lays down. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we got quite a dose on the narrative. You mentioned that religion is not the business of the state. You also talked about the FATF. The sad reality is, if anything, religion has always been the business of the state to this date. The fact is FATF, we always end up doing things when we are told and we are snubbed. Now, why don't we correct ourselves on our own? Why don't we realize that if a state doesn't have to get involved in religion, it should try to stay away from it? We always have to be told. But I will ask you another question, and that is on the lighter side. You must have had a tough time explaining our shifting narrative, the ever-evolving shifting narrative, to your counterparts, to head of states, to the kings, queens, and other diplomats. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, I don't think it's a shifting narrative. It is the narrative from which we were shifted during periods that we know. And I think the first period was entirely justified because there was a very real, genuine fear that if the Soviet Union was able to consolidate its hold in Afghanistan, then moving down through Pakistani Balochistan to the warm waters of the Arabian Sea would happen. It was a genuine fear, and I think we tried to handle it. What went wrong was that while the Iranians, who also had a flood of refugees from Afghanistan, confined them to their camps, we allowed the Afghans free rein to go wherever they pleased in Pakistan. And frankly, in my view, they became the strong arm of the religious parties at that particular time. Now, people talk about the fact that you have 1.4 million refugees. I disagree. You have at least 5 million.
Excuse me, sir. I think we'll have to. Okay. Well, I'm sorry, but we have got other panelists as well. Move on to Hina Rabbani Khar. You made some very bold statements a few years back in an interview to Geo News, which was subsequently in the form of an article in The Diplomat in 2016, July, and on how Pakistan's approach towards national identity has been flawed over the past 7 decades, besides the approach towards India. Would you care to elaborate on the flawed approach and how to correct the course?
Okay, that could be a very long, debate, I guess. But simply, I think what you're referring to is the statement pertaining to Pakistan's evolving.
It's yours.
Gigi, I absolutely understand. The national identity, yeah. Because I think the point is, and Amartya Sen talks about it very effectively in his book on identity, your identity cannot be a function of your hatred for another. if you allow that to be your identity of a state, cannot be antagonistic to another. The identity of a state must be a positive sum of those who go on to form the state, right? Because if you start forming a negative identity, then all you are spewing and all you are teaching and all you're training your children and your state is to basically boil in it, the hatred that it sort of evolves for others. Yeah. So that's...
So how to correct the course?
I think, you see, this is a big battle, and I genuinely believe when I say that we don't have much to celebrate, I feel I'm being more patriotic in those who want to portray Pakistan to have done fantastically well, and Pakistan to be going on a great course, and for being caught in this constant cycles, both at this geostrategic level and economic level of not being able to come out on its own, and always blaming others for having done things to ourselves. You know, I wouldn't have been able to say this if I had not served at a very important post as the Foreign Minister of Pakistan. And having served there, I know that no one can ever pressurize you to do anything that you think is not in your national interest. Now, if you have a different version of what is national interest, so for instance, if the current government believes it is not in Pakistan's national interest to keep its commitment to even be able to attend a conference independent of others' influence on you, then that's their perception of national interest. Mine wouldn't be like that, right? Because I believe that makes you a client state. When others' concerns, others' perceptions, other interests overcome and over sort of, you know, your own. And I think we have done a fantastically bad job in carving out the narrative that guides the state, and also how we have chosen to take the state forward. Because, you know, I grew up on the importance of the geostrategic location of Pakistan. Now, if I ask myself this question, or ask the audience this question, is that a positive or a negative? How we've chosen to use it, because what we've really done, if the end all and sum all of all Pakistan's foreign policy has been really reach out to countries and be the best friends and strategic partners to countries which are oceans and seas away. So we all love to hate the US, but we all love to be loved by the US. We want to be their strategic partner. We want to have them as the biggest trading partner. We want European Union to be our biggest strategic partner, and are dying to do strategic dialogues with every European country, anyone who's not brown or black, almost. And then...
Aptly said.
Then we believe that yet we have a geostrategic location where instead of using it to our advantage, we actually have built walls. Let's accept it. Look at our trade with Afghanistan. It has dwindled from a high for $5 billion, and from $5 billion it could have gone to 25 had we played our cards correctly. India is, of course, a no-go area, okay, because that is unpatriotic to even think about it, right? China is one exception to the rule. Iran, because we felt that Islam was no more enough, we needed to divide the Muslims further, so couldn't be just Muslims couldn't be good. It had to be which Muslims are good, and then it's the Sunni Muslims which are good. And then within the Sunnis, we have to divide it further. So this is where identity starts falling down, because you say, okay, Muslims, then you say, okay, within the Muslims, which Muslims? Then you say, within the Sunnis, which Sunnis? And then where will you stop? Who will remain to be qualified to be a good Pakistani? And it seems like, frankly speaking, it really doesn't stop anywhere. And then the other thing is that, look, I think today the world that we're living in makes Pakistan look almost okay and normal, okay? Because the world is all moving in a direction which is antagonistic, building fortresses, hating the others, hating the immigrants. Matlab, Najmuddin Sheikh Sahab would know this, I know this, as being lectured by the Europeans and the Americans on our responsibility to the refugees. And here, when they were given the refugee crisis, what did they do? Barbed wires, quotas, not allowing people to come in, putting them in conditions. Look at what's happening in the US. So the fact is that fear can unite people, unfortunately, far more than a vision can. Okay, so Trump, selling fear. Boris Johnson, selling fear. Austria, selling fear. Modi, selling fear. I would go on to say Imran Khan, selling fear. All of them leaders.
So we are equally responsible in selling fear. Okay, now since we've been doing some bit of state bashing, how about some bashing at the level of politicians? I'm coming back to you. So we know that religion is the weakest link of the power elites in Pakistan, you being part of the power elite. So the religious clergy knows this very well, and it manipulates it for the protection of its own interests. It's a symbiotic relationship, a very unhealthy you scratch my back, I scratch your relationship? Hina, Rabbani, Khar.
I think that has been the bane of Pakistan. I genuinely believe that trying to appease an extremist minority is the worst thing that a state can do.
It happens all the
Unfortunately-
time.
Sorry?
Happens all the time.
It
All
hap-
the political,
exactly.
all
So,
political
because,
parties do it.
Absolutely, and I cannot say that they don't. They do, because genuinely, it's an interesting mix in Pakistan, and honestly, intellectually, I cannot explain it, because you look at India, and the BJP post-80s was able to get the majority in the parliament. You look at Pakistan, the religious parties have never really been able to get even a decent
Yet the hold.
and yet the whole, because I think they tie in with how we try and define Pakistan and the state narrative, and how we try and appease anyone who uses the name of Islam. And unfortunately, I genuinely believe, and I think this movie drama was another good example of it, that we want to succumb to it, because, and by the way, it also has to do with how we've trained our youth, right? Because we fear the streets. They seem to have the streets.
How we have educated our
Yeah,
youth.
how we've allowed them to be educated in the madrasas, and we know what's...
And in universities.
Perhaps, yes.
The
that
mindset
too.
is equally prevalent.
Yeah, but I'm not going to sit here and explain my way through that, because I think that's not something that anyone should be proud of at all.
Okay. Well, changing the attitudes. Professor Hoodbhoy, you're an academic, and you face it on a daily basis with the student body out there, and you've seen it evolve over a course of time, and you've seen how the narrative has evolved as well. So how to deconstruct the attitudes and environment that has led to the morass we are in today?
Actually, if you don't mind, can you hear me now? Yeah, आवाज ऊंची करें ना? Hello, 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 hello. माइक ही नहीं काम कर रहा है यार. अब देखिए. Hello. Okay. Khawar, if you don't mind, I would like to address actually what the title of this seminar, of this meeting is, which is the unending battle for Pakistan's narrative. So I will address your question, but I do feel that I first need to address that. We haven't been honest with ourselves in the last 73 years, and we are not being honest now. Pakistan is in a state of confusion because it was born in a state of confusion. The basis of Pakistan, as articulated by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, was that there are only two nations that live on this subcontinent. They are mutually hostile. They cannot ever live in peace. That was part one. Part two was that Muslims form a nation. Well, the first is, given Narendra Modi's ascent to power, something that we can talk about, that hostility exists between religions, and between Hinduism and Islam, there was a particular kind of hostility. So we can talk about that. But the second part is completely nonsensical. If Muslims formed a nation which could live at peace with every part of that nation, we would not have Bangladesh. So Najmuddin Sheikh Sahab, you said you didn't want to address Bangladesh. I want to address it because that is not allowed in our official narrative. All we hear is that it was conspiracies. And there couldn't be a bigger nonsense than that. We mistreated the Bengalis. We thought of them as lesser people. We exploited them, and then we massacred them. Why don't we talk about that? Now, if Muslims could always live in peace together, you would not have the separatist movement in Balochistan, which again, nobody is allowed to mention. You would not have Manzoor Pashtun arrested and all the PTM leadership arrested today, and all those who go to their rescue also arrested as they were 2 days ago. This establishment is terrified that there is more than one kind of Muslim in Pakistan. This establishment cannot live with diversity. Now, all this goes back to the idea that somehow if Hindus and Muslims could be separated, then there would be nirvana, there would be utopia. Mr. Jinnah, who we all hold in such great regard, is the founder of Pakistan, but he never was able to put down what that Pakistan was to be. He never wrote a single research paper. He never wrote an essay. He gave a lot of speeches which at different times said very different things. And so yes, the audience here will applaud what he said on the 11th of August 1947, but do they want to hear what he said in the frontier, where he said, "You are Muslims first and Indians second." And this was before Pakistan was formed. In 1948, here in Karachi, addressing the Bar Council, he said, "This will be a land where Islamic law will be applied." He didn't have an idea of Pakistan I'm sorry, although many of you believe that he did not. In 1945, when he was asked by Maulana Madani, what will Pakistan be? He said, don't worry about that now. We have plenty of time. When we achieve Pakistan, we'll see what it's going to be. So there was nothing about how you would get rid of Jagirdari. There was absolutely no mention at all. Would Pakistan be a federation or a confederation? Nothing on that. How would Pakistan survive in a world where science and technology is what makes countries strong? He had no plans for that. And so Pakistan was born in a state of confusion, and that confusion should have ended in 1971 when the two-nation theory went into the Bay of Bengal. We should have gotten rid of the two-nation theory then. It makes absolutely no sense today. It is nonsense today. So I can be arrested for that? Yes? So those in the... What we need is a Pakistan that is built upon common interests of the people of Pakistan, which must include the Baloch, the Sindhis, the Pathans, the Punjabis, the Gilgitis, Baltistanis, everyone. This is not a country that was made for the armed forces of Pakistan. This is a country that was made for its people. Unless we get around to that basic truth, all this is neither here or there. Today, we do not need an ideology for Pakistan. Countries survive without ideologies. Holland has no ideology, nor does Japan. And look at Bangladesh, who were our poor cousins. They're doing so much better than we are. Their foreign exchange reserves are 4 times ours. Their quality of life index is so much better. Why? Because they don't have an ideology, and we do. Khawar, thank you for that wonderful documentary you made. It showed, it's a potpourri. It shows all the confusions, all the issues that confront us today, and we must find our way out of that morass, and the way out is by becoming a normal country. You see, normal countries don't have ideologies. Normal countries simply work for the benefit of their citizens. And those countries not just survive, they thrive. We should thrive. Thank you.
Wow. I got an earful, and I'm glad I got it. Well, Dr. Hoodbhoy, you're well known for your views, and establishment knows that very well. And I would say, with all due respect, that your views could be as brittle as the establishment's views. They are equally brittle. So let me complete. Would you be willing to sit with the very establishment you have been at loggerheads to help them design and develop a workable strategy towards a pragmatic national narrative while maintaining your stand?
The national narrative should be a rule of law. Nobody should be above the rule of law. Number 2, part 2 of our national narrative should be that every citizen of Pakistan, irrespective of religion, creed, or caste, should be equal, have equal rights, and that is something that our constitution, our present constitution, does not allow. So it's very simple. I have nothing against the establishment. I have great admiration for some of our Fauji heroes. The only thing is, we request them, simply do what you are paid to do. We pay you to defend our borders. Do that, and we are happy with it. We have no fight with you, but do that only.
Well, that answered the how part, are you willing to sit with the establishment?
Am I willing to?
Sit with the establishment to design a strategy.
I am always ready to sit with the establishment. Why should I not? I have nothing to hide. If they have nothing to hide, then they should be willing to sit with you and me and anybody, any common citizen of Pakistan. But do they?
Fair enough. I believe there's an opening here that must be explored. Yes, please add, Dr. Robinson.
First of all, I'd like to say I agree with almost everything that Dr. Hoodbhoy has said. And I'd also like to make a comment that actually about the assumption that I think lies behind the title of this particular session, that somehow it is not a good thing to have a contested national narrative. Almost every country that's democratic in the world has a contested national narrative. And the process of concentration is actually a function of the way in which your economy is changing, the way in which society is moving, the way in which social mobility is taking place. And the process of contestation is actually a good thing, not a bad thing. It's only a bad thing when you don't have mechanisms in society to enable that discussion to happen without bloodshed and without difficulty. So contestation is the inevitable result of being a relatively successful national operation.
Would you like to add to it? To Dr. Robinson's comments?
I agree. I think the difference is for any country it's natural to have a contested national narrative. I believe the difference is why I think most Pakistanis feel differently is because there seems to be a national narrative which is forced down the throat of many people, and this seems to be the only narrative which is allowed to be a patriotic narrative. Anything else, dissent is considered to be unpatriotic, even in the formation of national narrative. Therefore, you might feel over here it to be perceived differently for the narrative to be contested.
Okay, could I just make one comment? Tonight, Britain leaves the European Union. And Britain, over the next 10 years, is probably going to break up. The Scottish will become independent, the Irish will unite, but probably move towards independence themselves. This is also, a process of, if you like, contestation in a relatively mature society. But this is inevitable, and you have to see that we have to have mechanisms to try and deal with it. In Britain and Europe, we've not actually been able, over the past 10, 15 years, to create the mechanisms to deal with it.
Can I this is a very good point that you make, and I think this debate becomes very interesting, because the reason why Britain is doing what might be considered by many people, including Ian Bremmer, who said recently that had anybody else done this to Britain, it would have been the biggest conspiracy in the world, because this is perhaps, in his view, the most self-destructive thing Britain could do. That's his view. That might be my view also. But the difference is that over there, it is at the back of a referendum. So even if it is a 0.02% difference, it's the people who voted for this self-destruction or self-glorification. So that's the difference. Here, it is considered to be a state narrative which is forced on the people.
Thank you.
Well, I can say the mistake was, in a parliamentary democracy, to have referendums. That was the weakness.
Well, this mention of Brexit brings up the issue of Scotland. They had a referendum that Boris Johnson says holds true when it was held in 2014, and I'm not going to let you touch that. But at the moment, it looks like there is a majority for wanting to opt out and to stay in the Union, in the European Union. So I'm not sure that necessarily the rules of democracy are being followed in terms of the position of Wales or of Scotland. And there are going to be consequences of that, which could be very deleterious for not only England, but also for Wales and Scotland. Very deleterious. Or they could lead you back within a decade to being part of the EU again. I don't know. That's up in the air. But
You're saying in fact just what I said, that you can't actually have referendums in parliamentary democracy.
Well, with all the strife and the battle drums in the region, we still see winds of change. Even Saudis under the Crown Prince are promoting a more secular atmosphere now by encouraging broader nationalism, reducing archaic traditions and extremist Islamist ideas, and religious control over the society. Mr. Ambassador, in light of the recent overhaul in Saudi attitudes towards Islam, religious extremism, and critical introspection of the national narrative, do you see a hope with respect to our struggle with the same? Because we seem to be following Saudis in everything. Because we seem to be following Saudis in pretty much everything.
Look, we know, and this is one of the first lessons you learn in both your relations with other countries, with other people, and nations when you have relations between nations. There's no free lunch. When you want, you have to pay. Diplomacy, they used to say, consisted of the fact that you pay with one hand and you take with the other and try and minimize what you pay and maximize what you take. Now people say, no, that's not proper diplomacy. Proper diplomacy consists of the fact that both should get up from the table with a win-win. That is, both should feel that they've gained from the transaction. Now, right now, you're in a position, let's be honest, you're in a position where you need that oil at concessional prices for the next 3 years, and which apparently has been promised to you. The Saudis have just approved the memorandum. It's going to be a lengthy process, but it seems to suggest that now there has been approval in terms of the legal requirements in Saudi Arabia for the setting up of the refinery and for the investment of 20 billion in our fossil fuel and renewable energy resources. Whether this comes about or not, but there is very much the concrete fact that you have had perhaps 12 billion, perhaps more as loans, and you need those $3 billion worth of concessional oil supplies from both the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Let's be practical. I mean, it's very nice to be able to say that how can you do things against your national interest, against your national pride? This is part of your national interest, that you keep yourself afloat. Keep yourself afloat and start improving.
On loans? Keep yourself afloat on loans?
Look, that's the whole point. You can get a loan at 15%, which is what you're doing.
What kind of pride and sovereignty it generates
No,
when you're living on loans?
I'm not advocating those loans. I'm saying that you are getting oil at concessional rates and you have received loans at concessional rates. Now, these are all things that have to be paid for. Whether we like it or not, that is the way things are done. Okay. I think the organizers are getting a little antsy.
Oh, yes, they are. Well, thank you. And we'll now open the floor for questions. Yes, sir.
I just had a quick question for Professor Hoodbhoy. You said, according to the Constitution, everybody is equal, but at the same time, a non-Muslim cannot become the Prime Minister, if I'm not wrong, or President. So if like a non-Muslim cannot take one of the highest offices in the country, how can they ever be equal or empowered? And that's just one. I mean, there are many other examples of when they are legally not equal.
So the question is, it's a statement. Yours is a statement rather than a question, that the high offices can only be taken by Muslims. That's absolutely the way it is in the Constitution, and I think it is wrong. It should not be that way. But what is your question?
Well, my question is that Pakistan was supposed to be a social welfare state, even according to the Islamic teachings. But unfortunately, we are living in a national security state. This is the confusion between
So the whole debate was on that, exactly. Well, thanks a lot. I believe we're running short on time, and we have come to this conclusion: the narrative, if it does not accommodate economic prosperity, it should be thrown out. Well, the organizers are short of time. There's a next session in line. Just make it a very short question, no statements, please.
Can you speak louder? Well, Kashmir, we are told by the establishment, is the Shah Rag of Pakistan. we've been without that Shahrag, and yes, we've been surviving for the last 73 years. It is not the source of our problems. Kashmir is not the source of our problems. Our problem is the forces which claim Kashmir to be the reason why we must be a garrison state. We can survive without Kashmir. India can survive without Kashmir. Let the Kashmiris handle it as they will. We wish them the best, but we cannot fight their fight. They must fight it themselves, and they are fighting it now. We wish them all success in that. We've tried to wrest Kashmir from India militarily 3 times. We've gone to war thrice with India. Each time it hasn't worked. Each time we've weakened ourselves. So we have to learn from that.
I think with this we'll bring it to an end. And thank you, Dr. Hoodbhoy, Dr. Robinson, Madam Foreign Minister, Hina Rabbani Khar, Ambassador Najmuddin. Thank you. And thank you to the audience.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our next session in the Getz Pharma Auditorium